Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. What a week it has been in Washington. The U.S. Senate has confirmed Judge Neil Gorsuch to the U.S. Supreme Court, but not without invoking the so-called nuclear option. What might the consequences be? Meanwhile, efforts to reform health care have revived just as the Middle East and the Far East heat up. To analyze it all, we're joined by a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee from Utah, Senator Mike Lee. He joins us from the Capitol. Senator, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Senator, for the first time, Democrats have successfully filibustered a Supreme Court nominee. The Republicans then, also for the first time, invoked the so-called nuclear option, changing Senate rules to allow a Supreme Court nominee to be confirmed by a simple majority. Senator John McCain had this to say before the vote. Listen.
After 200 years, at least 100 years of this tradition where the Senate has functioned pretty well, they think it'd be a good idea to blow it up.
Some that say
idiot. No, whoever says that is a stupid idiot who has not been here and seen what I've been through and how we were able to avoid that on several occasions. And they're stupid and they've deceived their voters because they're so stupid.
Your thoughts on this, Senator Lee? Only a stupid idiot would do something like this, deploy this nuclear option and reduce these judges down to a simple vote, according to John McCain. Your response?
My response to that is that I can speak for myself, can't speak for any colleague, but I can say that 3.5 years ago, the then Democratic majority in the Senate made the decision to go nuclear on the executive calendar. There are two hemispheres, two components of the Senate, if you will. There's the executive calendar, where we confirm presidential nominees, and there's the legislative calendar, where we consider bills to pass into law. On the executive calendar, they went nuclear in November of 2013, when the Democrats still held the majority. We've been operating under that precedent ever since then. The logic, the analysis that they used at the time to do that has been in place. It has been followed ever since then, and it applies, I believe, with equal force to Supreme Court nominees. It's just we haven't had any Supreme Court nominees since November of 2013, when this first happened. So I don't see today as any kind of a change. I see it as a logical application of what was done by the Democratic majority in November of 2013.
You're not concerned that this sets up a precedent when you're out of power, Republicans will not have any redress, won't be able to stop or filibuster or do anything regarding a Democratic president's nominee for the Supreme Court? Doesn't concern you?
Look, there's no question that this changes things, and that's why I was concerned at the time this decision was made in November of 2013. Anytime something like this happens, it has an impact on the Senate in the future. Long after the current majorities and the lineup with the White House have changed following subsequent elections. Nonetheless, it has happened. It did happen in November of 2013, and today was the logical extension, logical application of that precedent they set.
Do you entirely trust Judge Neil Gorsuch? I've read some pieces. Some are suggesting that the Republicans may not get who or what they expected once he reaches the high court. You've vetted him, you've talked with him and interviewed him in your committee. Your thoughts?
I've also argued cases in front of him on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit, where he now sits. Look, I find him to be an exceptional nominee. I think he will be extraordinary. We can't ever know exactly what someone will do, how they will write, how they will vote once they're on the Supreme Court until they're actually there. But that said, with this particular nominee, we could be pretty darn sure, based on the decade worth of judicial writings that we can review, the decades worth of opinions that we can examine from the 10th Circuit. This is a solid judge, one who understands that his only job is to figure out what the law says, not to remake it in his own image.
Senator Lee, health care reform efforts have been resurrected in the House of Representatives. After a crushing defeat, Speaker Paul Ryan had this to say about the latest plan to replace Obamacare. I'd like your reaction to it.
We have come together on a new amendment that we all believe will lower premiums and provide added protections for those facing real challenges gaining access to affordable care. This amendment would create a new federal risk-sharing program. It is a high-risk pool that will lower costs for people with pre-existing conditions and lower costs for everyone else. I've asked the House Rules Committee to mark up this amendment and add it to what we were already considering before.
Senator Lee, does that give you comfort? It's the same bill otherwise, right?
I honestly don't know. I don't know what they put together. I'm not going to comment on it until after I've had a chance to review the legislative text. Look, I want to see more than anything a health care reform measure that will bring down the cost of health care. The American people, to the tune of hundreds of millions of people, have found their health care becoming more and more expensive in the years since the passage of the Affordable Care Act. This is my touchstone for what I'll support. My touchstone for what I want to see is something that will bring those costs back down and re-empower patients to make decisions medically in consultation with their doctors rather than having those decisions thrust upon them by government bureaucrats in Washington.
But the original bill, the bill that the House was about to pass, couldn't pass a week ago, you were opposed to the way that was drawn, correct?
I identified significant concerns with it for the simple reason that I didn't think it did enough to bring down the cost of health care. I've always believed that we need to repeal Obamacare. We need to take away the impact that Obamacare had on the insurance market, causing premiums and deductibles to skyrocket. This bill didn't do enough of that. That's what I'm concerned about.
Well, we'll see what they finally come up with, but at least the amendments have begun. I want to move to international affairs for a moment, Senator Lee. The North Korean regime is making noise again this week. They're testing ballistic missiles while the president meets with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Now, President Trump has suggested that China should help restrain North Korea. Will they, and what do you expect them to discuss at Mar-a-Lago this weekend?
I do hope and expect that this will be discussed and that President Xi will be brought to an understanding of how important this is. China is in a good position to exercise influence over North Korea, to pull North Korea back from some very grave mistakes that could have consequences, not only in that region of the world, but also in ours.
Do you think trade and human rights will also be invoked during these meetings, or do you think they will remain on the back burner because of the North Korean tensions?
Look, I would be surprised if those issues didn't come up as well. That said, I don't speak for the president. I'm not going to try to do so here.
Sure. Okay. Let's talk for a moment about the border wall. Now, this was a cornerstone, really, of the Trump campaign. It was an oft-repeated promise. And at a Senate hearing this week, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly said this about the wall. I'd love you to react.
I will say this, that it's unlikely that we will build a wall or physical barrier from sea to shining sea, but it is very likely. I'm committed to putting it where the men and women say we should put it.
Senator Lee, how do you think President Trump's voters, your voters, will react to that? There won't be a physical wall from sea to shining sea?
I don't know that anyone is as concerned about making sure there is a single contiguous structure as they are about making sure that our border is secure. I think that's been President Trump's motivating force all along, is the fact that he wants to make sure that our border is secure. In some areas, that might involve additional fence material. In other cases, it might not, because perhaps there are sufficient structural, geological barriers in place. I trust that they'll make the right decision. They'll be able to figure out where additional fence material is necessary.
But as long as there's some reinforcement of the border, some barrier, that would satisfy you, whether it's extra policing or drones or other technologies to detect any breach.
I would assume it would be a combination of all of the above. Again, I want to make clear, I don't speak for the president or his administration. What I've long assumed is that, particularly in light of the fact that there are geological structures in place in many parts of the border, there are some places where it would matter more than it would in others, that they would probably deploy those resources selectively to those areas where it would make the biggest difference.
Before I let you go, Senator Lee, the president has long talked about a big infrastructure bill, one which could carry $1 trillion price tag. In an interview with the New York Times this week, he says he wants to move quickly on this and may tie it to health care or tax reform. Would you support that kind of expenditure, $1 trillion, whether it was attached to another bill or not?
There's no question that there is likely to be an additional investment in infrastructure in this country in the coming years. There are a lot of questions that have to be answered. about what share of that is going to be done by the federal government as opposed to the states and localities. There's also a significant question of how best to finance this insofar as it is federal. In part because we don't know the details of the president's plan on this, I'd be very reluctant to advise him to tie this together with something like health care, where we're moving forward trying to find consensus on that. I think it would probably tend to destabilize it. That'll, of course, be up to him whether he wants to advocate for it. I don't see it happening that way. I don't think he'll do it. I think it would unnecessarily complicate these other efforts.
Very good. Senator Mike Lee, thanks so much. We will be in touch in the coming days. Thanks again.